Hello and welcome to this webinar on the topic of digital wellness and the role of IT in this space. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Solis, Global Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce and renowned author. Brian has recently released his latest book, Life Scale: How to Live a More Creative, Productive and Happy Life, which also looks at digital wellness. There you go. Brian is here to share his thoughts on the consequences of constantly being interrupted with the plethora of platforms we rely on. A nice bit of alliteration there. And the role of IT that can help, just to find balance in this digital world. Welcome, Brian. Thanks for joining us again. Would you like to introduce yourself before we dive in?
Absolutely, Jerry. It's a pleasure to be here with you again. I look forward to our conversation. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Solis. I am the Global Innovation Evangelist, and that in my role at Salesforce, I'm constantly understanding how markets are transforming, shifting, especially in these times, from a human-centered perspective. So customers and employees, and forecasting trends in ways that help us use technology to reimagine customer engagement and experiences, employee engagement and experiences, and ultimately how to innovate in business and operational models so that we can compete more effectively as times and trends and tastes change.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Brian. Just to get, I guess, the ball rolling and set a bit of framework, and just set like a little background here. I think when we spoke previously, one of the topics that was top of mind was the impact of the pandemic. There was a big urgency to roll out additional technology to support a remote workforce and keep organizations running. And IT teams had an opportunity to be real heroes to the organization, especially as everything became more and more digital. But coupled with this, there was an expectation for employees to really rapidly adopt this technology. And there can be complaints and consequences as it relates to that tech adoption, right? From productivity distractions with the constant pings going off, the constant switching between different apps, the need to be always on, and just the sheer overwhelming array of new tools and new techniques people had to learn. So where should businesses and their IT leaders be focused now? I mean, the pandemic is moving into a different stage. We're starting to return to office. We're starting to, interact more with our peers in a more face-to-face kind of way, but it's still very much a remote hybrid work style for a lot of people. Technology is still critical to keep hybrid work running. In fact, Gartner recently conducted a survey on our behalf, and I found that most people, while they felt they were more productive overall with hybrid work culture, but they felt this also, in some cases, came at a cost, and that the workers had become stressed and burned out. So it's becoming more important to monitor employees' well-being and help them achieve that well-being as well. So maybe the first question, Brian, for you is as digital well-being. So what is digital well-being, and should it be a priority for organizations?
Let me answer the second part of that question first, which is yes.
Yeah, good. Then we're on the right webinar. So
it's absolutely more important than ever, but it's also something that is not as understood and appreciated as we need it to be. And so hopefully this conversation will help do its part to cast a light on the importance, because at the end of the day, we did radically have to shift. No one asked us. We just woke up one day and we were in a work from home and then eventually a hybrid world. And we're all trying to figure it out from the IT perspective, from the business management perspective, from the everyday work perspective, and then the technology and the humanity of all of this. So what makes this really important is that when we were all thrust suddenly into this sort of digital first environment, so it's work, it's entertainment, it's shopping, it's learning. In the case of my children, it was a full year of remote learning.
Yeah, likewise. Yep.
And now we have variants to contend with. We have a world that is debating over whether or not vaccinations are are implanting microchips in us. And unfortunately, that's going to prolong this sort of ambiguity of where we're going. So this is why those watching now, if you're watching now, it's very important to take a leadership stake and say, this is what we're going to do amidst ambiguity and how we're going to thrive in these times. Because we're not going back to normal, and I think that's a great thing. There's a lot of things about normal that were part of the problem. So where this now starts to come into hopefully focus is before the pandemic, anybody that lived a digital first life, whether that was on your mobile, whether that was constantly using your favorite apps, whether that was working in the office and getting the text message and entertaining that text message and going back, or checking your social feeds on a break while you were working, there was already a digital disruption happening that's been unfolding. Jerry, it goes back to 2006 with the launch of the iPhone, and then Facebook, and then Instagram, and then TikTok, and all of everything. Every tech revolution, consumer-facing tech revolution, has changed our behavior without necessarily us knowing. So it's a long answer, I know, but I just want to set the stage that before the pandemic, we were already being digitally distracted, and well-being and wellness weren't necessarily something that we knew we needed. Then suddenly, when everything became digital, we felt the anxiety, the stress, also the loneliness, the worry of what's happening in the world, the anger of having to live this way, the anger of not being able to get out of this faster. And so now you have this stress and anxiety that needs help. But it's not necessarily like I'm hungry or I have a headache. It's just we feel this certain way. So digital well-being is essentially understanding how we changed, understanding the stressors in lives, understanding the anxiety, and peeling those back and finding ways to improve our interconnections, our connections, our engagement through technology, but also through new wellness practices to help get this managed, understood, and then also prescribe a more positive, not just a productive, a more positive and engaging way forward. Someone once said, productivity is for robots. Let's find ways to collaborate, to be creative, to be happier in all of our work. So that's a long answer, I know, but I just wanted to, this is something that's been unfolding for a really long time. And the pandemic, it accelerated digital transformation, but it also accelerated the digital transformation within ourselves.
Yeah, and look, there's some really good points in there. I think one that really resonated with me is, we had all these conflicting demands and our frustrations and inabilities to deal with them. Like we have, I guess, still primitive capabilities around fight or flight that were never meant to, help you survive 200 notifications from your iPhone. We didn't evolve with those things in mind.
Jerry, can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
Do you know that I don't know if you pulled that number out of a hat, but that is the average number of notifications we get on a daily basis. The average person, not the power user, that 200 notifications a day.
I think I'm going to buy a lottery ticket because I did actually pull that out of the air. So. but no, it seemed to me like the right number because the number of distractions that we see, multiple notifications from social, from work, etc. And I think that builds up, again, that in itself builds up frustration without all the stress of additional work demands, the stress of learning new ways of working and dealing with new family and personal demands as well. I think you already answered this, but maybe specifically, what do you see as getting in the way, most in the way of our digital well-being?
There's two factors, and one of them is largely not understood because we did have to deal with the second. So the second being, we have a workforce that's now working from home, hybrid. Some are returning to the office, but we haven't emerged from this pandemic yet. And so there is that element of trying to figure this out, trying to get work done, trying to balance the household that is also trying to navigate these interesting times. Not every home has an office. Not every home has the privacy to be able to get work done. Not every home has the capacity to support internet and power and everything as it would be in an ideal situation. We're looking at 100 plus years of office evolution with, for example, Herman Miller in the 60s inventing the cubicle, and then the Aeron chair, and then every innovation that's been subsequent over the last several decades. So now we have a little over a year of trying to figure this out from home. So you have that. It's still going to be an issue. And even for those who are going back to work, you still have the stress of travel now, whether that's a train or whether that's a bicycle or what have you. You're still out in the public dealing with a virus that's in the wild. And then you have this you're still probably not going to work every single day from an office. So you'll still have to balance this working from home and working in an office. And then travel factors into this too. Will we be traveling like we used to? So you have all of those stressors that we're going to have to be programmatic about how we check in with one another, how technology is much more intuitive and connected so that we can be efficient, but also delighted as we're working in an intuitive way across these multiple universes. But the first one is the one that I wrote the book about. It's actually for all of these things. It was about did you know your relationship with technology, not just at work, just for example, your relationship with your mobile or social media or text messaging, that it is actually reprogramming how you operate. It's redesigning your human operating system, and it's not necessarily with an implicit understanding and agreement for it. So, for example, I'll bring up the 200 number. Every time you get a notification, we're being conditioned to check that notification. And every time you check that notification, you stop what you're doing and you do this, and then you come back, maybe you go do something else. And it is essentially programming us to multitask. And so we then, over the years, believe that we are multitaskers. And so I don't know about your browser. My wife's browser, for example, I don't even know that I can count that high, how many tabs she has open. And
mine may or may not be similar. So,
so that is a digital reflection of how we're thinking, that we have all of these things that we're doing. We'll get to one later. We might not get to that one to another time, but we don't want to close it. So we keep this cognitive load of task switching, but it's not really multitasking. And so, like your system, if you have a lot of browser tabs open, your system has to give it resources to keep those things at the ready. And the same is true for you. You have this cognitive load, and that your body is applying essentially all of the things that it does biologically, psychologically, emotionally, to keep at the ready that to be dealt with at some point. And so as you switch, you're expending that fuel, and it depletes over time. And so you're not giving your best self ever to any one thing. You're just moving from one thing to another. So why this is important is because ultimately these don't have the best health effects either. So well-being can be everything from how do you feel to your health. For example, there's a lot of research now that's starting to come out that the programmatic aspects of how digital gets more and more of your attention, because that's how they compete for one another. Whether it's Facebook, whether it's Netflix, they all trade on the commodity of your attention span. So they do things to make them more addictive, more compelling, more usable, more engaging. So you're immersed in these things. But the health benefits of that over time aren't any good. And we could have a whole episode about what's actually happening to your body and your brain, and then ultimately how to rewire it. So that's what Life Scale was about, was how this is what's happening, and here's how to manually not give up technology. In fact, design technology using the same techniques to be better for you, and to get you to be focused and to get the best out of you for any one thing. And so why that's important is, I'll give you an example. one of those 200 distractions, let's just say you're working on a presentation and you're trying to be in the moment and you're trying to be as creative as possible, and you get a text and you stop and you read that text. What should we have for dinner? Just making this up. You respond, you get into the moment there, have this little back and forth, and then you come back. Research shows that it takes about 23 minutes for you to get back into that zone of where you were creatively. And so if you do that multiple times, you're never really going to get back to that depth. And so that's just one example, but then there's the health benefits to all of this as well. Now, I'll just close out on this, is that the apps, the social apps, if you watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix, they use a technique called persuasive design, because essentially what they're doing is changing your behavior to their benefit. So they, for example, if we're talking about TikTok, it wants you to share more, it wants you to consume more. So the way that it produces the videos, the way that it allows you to scroll in certain ways, the way the algorithm tries to match things it knows that you're not going to be able to tune away from, those are all meant to keep you in there. And so when every single app in your personal life is doing that, we have to balance it with other technology, but also other wellness techniques, like whether that's going hiking, whether that's reading, whether that's doing creative work, whether that's using, for example, what I use, like a Pomodoro app, which keeps me focused for 25 minutes at a time. No breaks, no water, no going to get water refills, no phone calls, no social media, just in the work, in the moment. And then at the end of 25 minutes, I could take a break. So there's things that we can do to counterbalance all of that. And now you add the pandemic, and we have to have more conversations to see how one another is doing and find ways to bring out the best of us when we don't know all of these things are happening.
And I mean, a lot to unpack there. And as you said, probably a couple of episodes worth around some of the social programming and the impacts of that. But I think maybe to go into one point that maybe summarizes some of what you're saying, this concept of us being constantly on. So multitasking, switched on, but not necessarily engaged, right? So we're doing things, there's a lot of inputs, but not necessarily the right amount of outputs coming out afterwards. What do you think being on means? So, within the digital world, from a perspective of work, and what's the implication that, because I think one thing we've seen is that people have said, I've been more productive at home, but I've also worked longer hours. I've started earlier, I finished later. Have to be on and involved in things for longer. I guess, is that one of the symptoms of what you're describing here? And is that something that people need to consider from a digital wellness and a general wellness perspective?
Yes, it is taxing, because we're having to do so much more during normal work hours. We used to, for example, have our commute, our in-office time, our travel time, what have you, and everything was compartmentalized. But when everything is happening from home, if you have, for example, a child who needs tech support help during class, or a spouse or significant other that is just popping in, say hi, how's your day going? These are all types of distractions that we didn't necessarily, I mean, you had distractions in the workplace, but now everything's like, hey, coming back to what's for dinner, or should we have lunch? Or there's just things that are happening during the day that are pulling you away, that add to that all your social elements that are still happening digitally. And essentially what we're doing is now having to try to work, distract. I need a break, because your body is telling you it needs a break. So you'll go and not knowingly go to the very things that are going to cause a little bit more of the issues, for example, like brain dead time on TikTok or whatever that is. And so then it elongates your day, because you still have the deliverables, you still have people checking in on you. And this is why, for example, at Salesforce, we recently acquired Slack. And aside from all of the facts that it can be a new window to your world in terms of productivity, right? Changing what apps you're using and where. It is also a means of which you can communicate differently. Like we're communicating differently right now. Do we need that meeting, or can we just bang it out right now here in a collaborative messaging solution? So that means that if we're not intentionally changing the construct of our day, if we're not mindful about how we're spending our time and what we're doing when, then the days will get unwieldy. And that's what we're all kind of struggling with, because we don't necessarily have a wellness coach over our shoulder saying, did you know that when you do this, this is what happens? It also takes a 1 hour project and makes it a 3 hour project. And you don't feel happier because it took longer, and you're frustrated with yourself. And over time that builds up, and you become unhealthy in a lot of ways. And this is why well-being and wellness programs at work, technologically, but also from a managerial and employee engagement standpoint, can help not only counter these things, but make us work better, to make us happier, to feel like, hey, I've got this managed and under control, and I've got extra time now at the end of the day to go do some stuff with my family.
And I think that's probably a great segue into my next question. I mean, you talked about the implications for the individual and the responsibility on the individual, maybe to take control of their life, to look at techniques and methods that they can use to give them back some time, some of that precious time as well, reduce some of their distractions. And it's important for an employee, but it's also really important for an employer as well, right? Because for them, it's going to impact productivity. It's going to impact employee satisfaction and retention. So what role do the leaders in an organization need to take in digital wellness and in well-being? You already touched on well-being programs, so maybe could you expand a little bit on some things that you've seen work well?
Absolutely. So we had a report that came out on knowledge workers and how they're coping with well-being, work, productivity. And when technology is implemented in a way that is intuitive and engaging, all knowledge workers say that they feel like technology has improved their life during the pandemic, that they wouldn't have been able to do their job otherwise. And so that's important. That means that IT, when engaged with the right platforms, is definitely on the right path. It's a big part of the solution. The other parts are also understanding how can technology now also play a role in wellness. It can't just be, look, engagement, human resources, checking in, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Is there anything I can do? Like that empathy and that genuine engagement it can't go understated. But the other thing too is that technology now has to apply, and thank goodness we're now starting to embrace things like AI and machine learning, so that technology can help achieve balance, that technology can achieve focus and deep work, and that technology can help people from feeling burnt out. One interesting statistic was that 55% of knowledge workers say that they felt burnt out at their job, and that technology wasn't helping them solve that.
Yeah, and I think we've seen similar things as well. So feedback from a survey we did on IT professionals, similar kind of data points as well. Burnout. They felt they were achieving a lot, but they felt that it was coming at a great cost. And I think we saw a lot of interest in technologies, our workspace capabilities that I'll touch on later, that we could maybe take away some of that unnecessary overhead that was impacting the ability of people to get their work done. But again, it has to be done within an overall set of policies and a set of frameworks that an organization has to support people. So with that, how do you think leadership and technology can work together to promote those? Are these things separate, or is the sum of the parts more if they work well together and take advantage of both the leadership frameworks and the technology to deliver them?
So Jerry, are you saying you want to try to solve this right now?
Yeah. In the next 4 minutes, let's solve this.
All right. Okay. Well, I want to put out a couple of things before we go here, because there is the real sense of urgency right now. This is super timely conversation. In our research, we had found 30% of employees had said that they plan on leaving within a year. That's a pretty big number, and 92 and 90% respectively had said that they expect employers to offer technology that improves well-being, and that employers are responsible for fostering that healthy relationship with work technology. So these are expectations. So retention and recruiting, we've got to solve for this. So a couple of things to think about. What are the challenges that we're facing today? We got to do more than an audit or more than a survey. We've got to talk to employees and find out what's the new shift look like, but also what are some of the things that they are freaking out about or anxious about as the world starts opening up. Because we have to remember, it's not just about working from home and suddenly we're going back to the office. There's some people who are so excited for that. There's people who are worried about it, but we've all changed over the last 14 months. So we have to understand what are those changes and what are we worried about moving forward. Then what are the skill sets that we need to help combat that? So there's going to be digital learning, training, reskilling, so that we can help people get what they need to be not just productive, but happier and more engaged during this time. That we need tools to solve for that well-being on a daily basis and a consistent basis, and then also measures to show how people are doing and how they're feeling and how that's changing over time, so that we know where are we succeeding and where do we need to improve. I think we need a library of wellness resources, but more importantly, now I think employees want to also know, well, since the world has changed, how has my role changed? And now what's my new trajectory look like to be successful in this organization? Because I can tell you one of the worries that a hybrid workforce or a work from home workforce has is that they feel like they're going to be left out if they're not physically seen. So what's my path look like to achieve that growth that's going to be helpful for me? So the good news is that there's tools and platforms to do this. We just have to combine the technology with the human side of things to integrate wellness as essentially, I wrote an article, the headline was every company, in addition to being a technology company, in addition to being an innovation company, we also have to become a wellness company.
No, I think, look, I absolutely agree with you, because we're seeing that challenge already with attrition rates within various organizations. We're seeing, people haven't taken the time, looked at some of their factors in life and weighing up what's important to them. And I think an organization that supports them both with technology and policies is going to be the organization that can recruit the people they need and retain the people they need as well.
Absolutely.
I think, absolutely. Brian, is always a great conversation. One final question for you to close. If there was just one piece of advice you could give to organizations or employees to remain engaged and productive, but probably most importantly, happy, what would that piece of advice be?
It'll be a piece of advice in two parts. One is recognize that you are and you aren't your employees, because at an executive or managerial level, you feel what all employees are feeling, but you're also measured differently. And until we have those measures where wellness becomes part of our own success, we're going to have to go chase that information. So the second part of the advice is spend time with people, ask really hard questions, and try to uncover the wellness gaps that exist today and how people feel, what people want to feel, what are the gaps technologically that are creating the problem or not solving the problem. And let's start to understand what we can get our arms around so that we can have a roadmap to solutions. But I would say that lastly, do it now. Do it now. Your best people are already talking about leaving, I'm sure.
Brian, great piece of advice to end on. Thank you as always. Great to talk to you. I think the only problems I ever have when I'm talking to you is there's so much left unsaid that we can follow up on with something else. Thank you again very much for your time. Hope to talk to you again in the future. I'd now like to take a few moments. I'm just going to share a short presentation on how Citrix technology has been deployed to help some of our customers address some of their digital well-being and digital wellness challenges and help support the remote workforce. I'd like to start at looking at the current state of digital wellness. And really, Brian's already given us a really good overview of some of the challenges that we're seeing out there. But I just wanted to maybe talk specifically about three of them. Our users, our people are being, most reports that we have show that they were more productive during the pandemic. But some of that came down to working longer hours. And some of that came down to, making some challenging decisions. But how long can they remain in this state? How long can they work at, what people have called surge mode? How long is this current way of working sustainable? And really, what can we do to give people some time back in their day, time that they can use to look after themselves, time that they can look to be with their family. And I think as we move back to a hybrid mode, where we're going to be partially in the office, we're going to be partially at home, there'll be other challenges around commute, around the way that we have different ways of working, maybe in those two spaces. So we need to look at how we can address that challenge. And that really rolls into this idea of a space to succeed, that as we move from a more fixed remote way of working, we also need to give people the ability to work successfully irrespective of their location. Whether they're at home, whether they're in the office, that we don't move from a set of maybe distractions in the home, as Brian mentioned, your spouse, your partner, your children coming in to ask you questions about, what's for dinner, or what are we going to watch on Netflix later. But equally, there can be distractions in the office or distractions on the commute as well that can eat into that time. So we need to make sure that we allow people to work from the space that suits them best, that suits their working style, that they commute with a purpose, but that we help them be most productive in all those situations. And as well as those real world distractions, we also have to deal with digital distractions as well. So we talked about the 200 notifications and how those distract that. Brian mentioned about the amount of time that it takes to come back into the zone after you've been distracted, and how many distractions we have during the day. So we really need to enable our people with ways that minimize that distraction, minimize the number of notifications that they're getting from different applications, and the amount of context switching that they're doing in applications. And also just about the sheer amount of time that they have to spend searching for data. So we looked at a study previously that said knowledge workers spend something like 20% of their time searching for data. So if we can minimize that, we immediately start to give them back some time, help them be more productive, and minimize those distractions as well. So if we look at how can we deliver a more human workspace experience, and I want to look at three T's that are pulled out here, three ways that organizations can help their users, and specifically around empowering those users, helping them focus on their own wellness, and providing the techniques and capabilities to support that. So one is trust. And I think the pandemic has, if nothing else, helped foster more trust in our users to work, irrespective of where they are, whether they're remote, whether they're back in the office. We have more trust in them. But we also may want to provide tools that allow them to demonstrate the work that they're doing. So Citrix's recent acquisition of Reich provides a very powerful tool that allows users to keep track of their own tasks, but also be very open and visible and to the rest of their organization, to their management team, about what work that they're doing. So that's without a sort of big brother, kind of somebody looking over your shoulder, but just visibility on what's being done. But this trust has to be fostered as well by leadership, by management styles, by being very engaged with people and very open with your expectations. And time's really important as well. Time, not just in the sense of, let me give you back a few hours or minutes in the day. And that in itself is important, because most of us are time poor at the moment. And we're investing more time into our working lives. So anything that can remove the need to context switch, to flip between multiple applications, to spend time looking for the tools that we need, the applications that we need, that's important as well. But if you also allow people control their time when they work, the spaces that they work from as well. That's really powerful because people work at different ways and they work better at different times during the day. And that becomes a powerful tool as well for recruitment and retention. If people have more control over their time, more control and choice over the spaces that they work in as well, they have basically more control over the life. And with that, that helps with their own well-being and ultimately their values themselves and their value to the organization. And finally, tools, and this is probably more the direction that I'm going to go in this presentation now, those tools that enable workers to be more productive. The ability to get to the applications that they need quickly, have those applications organized for them, have the insights that they need from those applications. So they don't necessarily have to scroll through multiple screens or go through complex menus. So this concept we have in Citrix Workspace of micro apps that extract individual actions and insights. And this really works together with that concept of time, giving back those users time in the day, allowing them to be more productive, allowing them to control the time that they need and not be wasteful with the time, not having to spend additional time just trying to find that right application or move from one set of applications to the other to get really simple, often rote tasks done. Because we want to enable people to work in the way that suits their needs. And that's got a really positive knock-on effect, not just for the user, but for the organization as well. As Brian mentioned earlier, it's a time where people are questioning their work, questioning their career. We're seeing record levels of attrition. So organizations that can provide the best hybrid work style, including the best tools for that hybrid work style as well, can attract the best, most diverse talent in a workplace that's really fair and equal and promotes people based on their input, not based on where they are, not based on their specific work style, but their work input to the organization and the outcomes that they provide. And we need solutions that empower people. So we always talked about helping and attracting them, retaining them. Once they're there, we want to empower them. And we want to remove those unnecessary distractions. So the average workday, we talked about time, the average workday is getting longer. There's an interesting statistic from a Citrix podcast called Tired and Wired about we were receiving 46 billion more email messages in February 2021 than in February 2020. So the volume of mails, the volume of those have gone up, but also other digital communication tools as well. So we want to make sure that we remove those unnecessary distractions, that people are doing their best work with the best tools that they have. And for a knowledge worker, spending a large part of the day just answering and dealing with email isn't necessarily the best use of their time. So we want to make sure that those workers, if they're healthcare workers, if they're in professional services, if they're in finance, if they're in public sector, whatever, that they're doing the most important tasks. And those simple, repetitive tasks, that we can take care of them using capabilities within Citrix Workspace that can, simplify them, automate them away, put them in a single space where people can access them easily. And these solutions are the foundations of the new world of hybrid work. And by that, I mean, these are solutions that enable people to work and allow businesses to rethink what work means, rethink about the spaces where people work, rethink about the need for people to be in specific locations, bring people together when it makes sense, have people travel when it makes sense, have them commute when it makes sense, but don't do it unnecessarily. And I think, as Brian mentioned, this has just been kind of 1 year into this new way of working, or 18 months at this point. There's still a lot that we can do. The current approach that we have of all coming into the office was really based off the back of the last industrial revolution and was based on constraints, technology constraints in many cases. We now have a real opportunity to reimagine work, reimagine the way that people interact with each other. And really, I think we're just on the cusp of that. But the tools, the capabilities, such as those that are in Citrix Workspace, are going to allow this to be possible and are going to allow people to work in a different way, but also really take into context their need for this digital well-being, their need to be able to switch off, disengage, irrespective of where they're working. Because that's going to be key as well to keeping people at their most productive, at their most successful, and at their happiness within the organization. And really, it's about putting people at the heart of what you do. Really successful businesses know that their people are the most important, that their employees are the people that make their businesses a success. And investing in their employees has a knock-on benefit to the organization and really drives up things as well, like successful customer experience by investing directly in those people. And part of that investment is giving them the right tools, but also the ability to, the frameworks, the policies that support them using those tools in a way that's not detrimental to their own digital well-being. So if we have a tool like Citrix Workspace, which really places the employee and the employee's experience at the center of that, if we do things like simplify access so they don't have to worry about multiple passwords, if we can bring all the tools that they need, all the applications that they need together, and reduce the need to context switch, to search unnecessarily, if we can drive down the number of distractions and number of notifications, we can have that user more productive, more engaged, have a better experience, but also improve their own well-being. Not have them constantly switched on, give them back some time in the day, time that they can spend with their family, time that they can spend on their own needs. And we can do this generally within the context of Workspace, our ability to guide, to organize, to automate work within that, to provide work management capabilities to show a user what's most important for them to do and what other things are less important or distractions. But we also have very specific ways that we can do this as well for an employee well-being use case. Using the micro app capabilities within Workspace, we can then deliver employee resources, relevant content and FAQs to support our employees. We can reward employees through recognition programs and make sure that they feel engaged and part of a community. We can provide good news to the employees. We can share positivity across the organization. And we can do surveys as well, just to check in quickly, make sure that they're feeling well, are feeling engaged. And this is part of, obviously, an overall program. And really, we're seeing that studies by Gartners and others are showing that wellness programs are real differentiators for an organization. But having tools that can help you deliver those wellness programs within the everyday context of your work is going to be key. So those tools, again, as I said, a simple place for a user to find help. And that could be something like accessing mental health first aiders in an organization, but it could also just be seeing what's happening, what are other people up to, being able to check in with people, being able to see at a glance, resources that can help, and then being able to provide feedback to the organization. All of these are going to be key. So I think just a few takeaways for me as I finish up. I think employee wellness, digital wellness are going to be key differentiators for organizations. As Brian said, the time to start is now. We need to look at how we can help our people as they move from this very remote way of working to the more hybrid way of working. And we need to make sure that we have the right policies and frameworks in place to support this, but also the right tools that remove distractions, but also tools that foster digital wellness as well. I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to listen today. And I hope to be able to talk to you again in another session. Thank you.